Assessment is a central process in education. If students learned what they were taught, we would never need to assess. We could instead just keep records of what we had taught. But as every teacher knows, many students do not learn what they are taught. Indeed, when we look at their work, it is sometimes hard to believe that they were in the classroom. In fact, it is impossible to predict with any certainty what students will learn as the result of a particular sequence of classroom activities. And because we cannot teach well without finding out where our students are starting from, we have to assess. Even if all our students started out at the same point, a highly unlikely situation. Each of them will have reached different understandings of the material being studied within a very short period of time. That is why assessment is the bridge between teaching and learning. It is only through assessment that we can find out whether what has happened in the classroom has produced the learning we intended. Of course, assessment is also used for other purposes in education, which makes the picture much more complicated. American English is, without doubt, the most influential and powerful variety of English in the world today. There are many reasons for this. First, the United States is, at present, the most powerful nation on earth, and such power always brings with it influence. Indeed, the distinction between a dialect and a language has frequently been made by reference to power. As has been said, a language is a dialect with an army. Second, America's political influence is extended through American popular culture, in particular through the international reach of American films, movies, of course, and music. As Kahan has pointed out, the internationally dominant position of a culture results in a forceful expansion of its language. The expansion of language contributes to the prestige of the culture behind it. Third, the international prominence of American English is closely associated with the extraordinarily quick development of communications technology. Microsoft is owned by an American, Bill Gates. This means a computer's default setting for language is American English, although of course this can be changed to suit one's own circumstances. In its periodic quest for culinary identity, Australia automatically looks to its indigenous ingredients, the foods that are native to this country. There can be little doubt that using an indigenous product must qualify a dish as Australian, notes Stephanie Alexander. Similarly, and without qualification, states that a uniquely Australian food culture can only be based upon foods indigenous to this country, although, as Kroll remarks, proposing Australian native foods as national symbols relies more upon their association with nature and geographic origin than on common usage. Notwithstanding the lack of justification for the premise that national dishes are, of necessity, founded on ingredients native to the country, after all, Italy's gastronomic identity is tied to the non-indigenous tomato, Thailand's to the non-indigenous chili. The reality is that Australians do not eat indigenous foods in significant quantities. The exceptions are fish, crustaceans and shellfish from oceans, rivers and lakes, most of which are unarguably unique to this country. Despite valiant and well-intentioned efforts today at promoting and encouraging the consumption of native resources, bush foods are not harvested or produced in sufficient quantities for them to be a standard component of Australian diets, nor are they generally accessible. Promoting active lifestyles can help us address some of the important challenges facing the UK today. Increasing physical activity has the potential to improve the physical and mental health of the nation, reduce all-cause mortality and improve life expectancy. It can also save money by significantly easing the burden of chronic disease on the health and social care services. Increasing cycling and walking will reduce transport costs, save money and help the environment. Fewer car journeys can reduce traffic, congestion and pollution, improving the health of communities. Other potential benefits linked to physical activity in children and young people include the acquisition of social skills through active play, leadership, teamwork and cooperation, better concentration in school and displacement of antisocial and criminal behavior. The importance of physical activity for health was identified over 50 years ago. During the 1950s, comparisons of bus drivers with more physically active bus conductors and office-based telephonists with more physically active postmen demonstrated lower rates of coronary heart disease and smaller uniform sizes in the more physically active occupations. This research led the way for further investigation, and evidence now clearly shows the importance of physical activity in preventing ill health. It is important for us to be active throughout our lives. Physical activity is central to a baby's normal growth and development. This continues through school, and into adulthood and older years.
The National Oceanography Centre (NOC) is engaged in research into the potential risks and benefits of exploiting deep-sea mineral resources, some of which are essential for low-carbon technology, as well as using ocean robots to estimate the environmental impact of the said potential deep-sea mining activities. Late last year the NOC led an expedition on the RRS James Cook that found enough of the scarce element tellurium present in the crust of a submerged volcano that, if it were all to be used in the production of solar PV panels, could provide 2/3 of the UK's annual electricity supply. Recently, the NOC also led an international study demonstrating deep-sea nodule mining will cause long-lasting damage to deep-sea life, lasting at least for decades. These nodules are potato-sized rocks containing high levels of metals, including copper, manganese and nickel. They grow very slowly on the seabed, over millions of years. Although no commercial operations exist to extract these resources, many are planned. Professor Edward Hill, executive director at the NOC commented, "By 2050 there will be 9 billion people on Earth and attention is increasingly turning to the ocean, particularly the deep ocean, for food, clean supplies of energy and strategic minerals." The NOC is undertaking research related to many aspects and perspectives involved in exploiting ocean resources. Ethics is a set of moral obligations that define right and wrong in our practices and decisions. Many professions have a formalized system of ethical practices that help guide professionals in the field. For example, doctors commonly take the Hippocratic Oath, which, among other things, states that doctors do no harm to their patients. Engineers follow an ethical guide that states that they hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Within these professions, as well as within science, the principles become so ingrained that practitioners rarely have to think about adhering to the ethic. It's part of the way they practice. And a breach of ethics is considered very serious, punishable at least within the profession by revocation of a license, for example, and sometimes by the law as well. As scientific ethics calls for honesty and integrity in all stages of scientific practice, from reporting results regardless of properly attributing collaborators. This system of ethics guides the practice of science, from data collection to publication and beyond. As in other professions, the scientific ethic is deeply integrated into the way scientists work, and they are aware that the reliability of their work and scientific knowledge in general depends upon adhering to that ethic. Many of the ethical principles in science relate to the production of unbiased scientific knowledge. A day would come, Percy Shelley predicted in 1813, when the monopolizing eater of animal flesh would no longer destroy his constitution by eating an acre at a meal. He explained, the quantity of nutritious vegetable matter consumed in fattening the carcass of an ox would afford 10 times the sustenance if gathered immediately from the bosom of the earth. 200 years later, mainstream agronomists and dietitians have caught up with the poet. A growing scientific consensus agrees that feeding cereals and beans to animals is an inefficient and extravagant way to produce human food, that there is a limited amount of grazing land, that the world will be hard-pressed to supply a predicted population of 9 billion people with a diet as rich in meat as the industrialized world currently enjoys, and that it's not a very healthy diet anyway. On top of this, livestock contribute significantly towards global warming, generating 14.5% of all man-made greenhouse gas emissions, according to one much-quoted estimate from the United Nations. Now that the problem has been identified, the challenge is to persuade people in wealthy countries to eat less meat. That might seem a tall order, but governments have successfully persuaded people to quit smoking through a combination of public information, regulation and taxation.